Hello, everyone, and inside today's Locked On Canadiens, we are talking about how bad is this tank really going to be with an expert on how bad a tanking, rebuilding team can be and all the bits that can help us cope with this entire season. And that's all coming up inside today's show.
For Locked On Canadiens, your daily podcast on the Montreal Canadiens, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 690 of Locked On Canadiens. We are your daily Montreal Canadiens podcast, and you can find us wherever you get your daily podcast. And if you are watching on YouTube, you see that we have a very special guest. And while they have made time for us, I'm going to make them wait for another 30 seconds. While I introduce myself, I am Scott Matla. I'm one of your hosts. I'm joined, as always, by the active stick, Laura Saba. And Laura, once again, one of our best episode ideas. We threw this together while I was not working at my day job today because we are very smart individuals. How excited are you to talk about with our guest today?
Well, our guest has had me on his podcast, but we haven't had him on yet because we usually have the more chaotic half of Locked On Sharks on. But now that chaotic half doesn't exist, we've got like a calmer, more mature, more grown up, more reasoned Locked On Sharks guest. And I'm actually really excited for this episode because like one of those throwing together ideas, usually it turns out to become a fun discussion.
But just to counteract my co-host point here is that our guest compared the subject we're talking to with a turd sandwich and a poop milkshake earlier. I have those switched. It doesn't matter. We are joined by JD from Locked On Sharks. And JD, thank you so much for making the time for us today, man.
No problem. It was either this or hanging out with my children. So easy choice.
Are they going to interrupt in the middle of the show like that, like your famous blooper, or we?
No, they're upstairs hanging out with mom's got mom duty right now for a little bit, and then I'll come in and take over and save the day. So yes.
So we have a very fun idea here that we came up with because we're like, what can we talk about with the Canadiens? Because like the season preview, they invited 74 people to training camp, and we're not going to know at all what the roster looks like for like 7 months with how many people are on this training camp roster. Yes. So we thought the Athletic is doing their previews right now. The media is going out. Everyone's starting to do their predictions and everything. The Habs are going to be bad this year. More than likely, the Habs are going to be bad. JD, who has covered the Sharks for the past couple of years now, knows what it's like to be in the same spot as the Montreal Canadiens right now, a team that is working its way back towards its former glory. And so I got to ask, how bad is this season going to be for Habs fans?
It can't be worse than last year, right? Because if you kind of look where the Habs and the Sharks are, there's similar timelines. You know, I mean, I know the Habs weren't as successful for at least long-term success that the Sharks had. You know, where the Sharks, they had, you know, a cup run in the 16-17 season, and then they, you know, made the playoffs several seasons. Then they made their Western Conference run in the 18-19 season. And then you come out of that season, you're like, okay, like we can, the pieces and foundation are still here. There's still a chance that this team could be good. And then everything just falls off a cliff, right? And they end up getting the 3rd overall pick, which they didn't have that year. So that was like the worst part of it. And then they kind of start going through this retool, as they're calling it, where we've never actually heard the word rebuild come out of either Doug Wilson's mouth or new general manager Mike Greer's mouth. But we've heard a retool, a refresh, rebrand. We've heard all the re's. But they've been going through a rebuild in the past couple of years. And we saw the 2020 draft class as kind of the first bit of that, where, you know, they were able to have a really nice draft class despite not having that 3rd overall pick. Last year, they got William Eklund at number 7. And then this year, they had the number 11 pick, but they traded back and gathered some more pieces type of thing. So while this year is going to suck, I don't think it's going to be as bad as last year for the Habs, where you were coming off your cup run and felt like, okay, like we were better than we were expected. We still have a bunch of pieces. we're really excited about Cole Caulfield. We have Suzuki. We have a bunch of guys who should get better theoretically, and maybe we don't make the cup run again. We should still be pretty good. And then, of course, you guys know everything kind of fell apart. So going into the season, you already know your expectations are going to be low. And I don't think the Habs are going to be as bad as, they're going to be one of the worst teams, I think, but I don't think they're going to be like the worst team that we saw last year. And I think that's going to do a lot with their coaching, right? I mean, we saw how much better this team was when Martin St. Louis arrived. Cole Caulfield was actually Cole Caulfield. And I think there's a lot of really fun young pieces to get excited about with the Canadiens. And that's what this whole year is going to be about, is enjoying the ride with these young guys.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, is that it's like, it can't be worse than last year. And last year they were unexpectedly bad. Like, they weren't expected to be great, like maybe a fringe wild card team if they were lucky, if everything went well.
Yep.
And then obviously Carey Price is likely done. Shea Weber's done. Everybody on the team was injured except for Nick Suzuki at some point or another. How he managed that, I will never know. And the readjusted expectations, I think, if Marc Bergevin were still here, and I think, Laura, you would agree with me on this, is that he thinks they should win every year, so he sets the expectation at that. The team expects to be more competitive, but I think having that lower, like, hey, it's going to be bumpy, there's still bodies to move out kind of thing, will definitely help a little bit. Laura, am I off base at all with thinking that?
I don't think so at all. I think because, the current front office is bold. We say they're transparent on our podcast, but I think it's a selective transparency that they have, which I really enjoy. But for me, I think it's very much, and I know we're gonna ask him a little bit about in the next segment, but I think the coaching staff very much, JD, like you mentioned, it really makes a difference, right? Like, Marc Bergevin's choices were not as inspired as the current front office. And we have to agree that Martin St. Louis is an inspired choice, right? And I think the writing on the wall as well is, like, the players have come in and they said, oh, don't expect us to tank. Like, the players, the attitude is, we're going to win. The roster composition is going to disagree with that.
Yeah, and we have so much to dive into, because this is what to expect when you're expecting to be terrible with Locked On Canadiens and Locked On Sharks. And we're going to dive into our next segment and how we, including myself, who never seems to take his own advice, can cope with this upcoming Montreal Canadiens season. And that's all coming up in a moment. But first, a word from our sponsors at betonline.net, who are your number one source for all your pro and college football betting, with both seasons in full swing. You can get all the latest league developments, matchups, news, podcasts, including everything every single day. And they also have all your information on sports wagering, including live betting, esports, and scores. You can check in on other sports, MMA, boxing, baseball's got the playoffs right around the corner, golf. Everything you are looking for is at betonline.net. So head to their website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. We are back. It is the slightly less chaotic Locked On Canadiens, Locked On Sharks crossover. Kyle, if you are listening to this in the land of spiders and kangaroos, howdy. You probably not, because it's like,
you have
I
to
don't
say
know,
g'day,
3 weeks in the future.
Or
I would say it's 3 weeks in
Howdy's
the
not a
future
thing.
there. There's hobbits or Harfoots or something or other. Anyways, we have JD Young from Locked On Sharks joining us. And in our first segment, JD, you mentioned the draft class of the Sharks kind of giving some light in a sucking black hole of suck for teams.
Yes.
And the Canadiens are kind of in that spot this year, because they just wrapped up their prospect showcase in Buffalo, and all eyes were on Juraj Slafkovský, the gargantuan Slovak with a chin made of granite and an attitude that can best be described as confidently arrogant, but not overly arrogant. I don't know how to describe him.
Swagger. He has a swagger about him.
That's the one. He broke another bike today, apparently. So, like, he's a large child. Like, being in his presence
Slafkovsky
is
swagger. There's something there. The marketing's there.
Laura, we need to make t-shirts. We need to make t-shirts again.
Swagkovsky.
Swagkovsky.
Everybody's
There we
been
go.
like, Slapgolsky, all kinds of, like, somebody's like they're calling him Chadkovsky, which I thought Chad was a bad thing. I don't know. I don't speak incel.
Chad's a good thing.
Chad's a good thing. Okay,
Yes.
I don't know.
JD,
Is
can we
it
make
not an insult
stickers?
thing anymore?
I think we can make some stickers. We'll talk offline about this.
Swagkowski.
The Swagkowski stickers.
Let's
So.
go. Back to the original point here. By the way, check out JD's store. It's great if you ever want stickers. I have the Small Goals Boy and Power Horse ones on my laptop right now. They get a lot of attention in the press row. Whether it's good or not, I don't really care. But how can we as Habs fans kind of follow in the prospects? It's one of the big things with Locked On Sharks and where a lot of your bases come from, and admittedly, extremely good coverage of prospects is if the team is bad, is it a bad thing to more focus on the future in that and just kind of find joy in, for you guys like Brendan Coe and William Eklund and Thomas Bordeleau, and the Habs can do that with, Philip Machar and Owen Beck and all their 7 million prospects that are now in the organization.
Yeah, because is it really worth getting excited about guys who are currently on your roster right now who probably aren't going to be there in 2 to 3 years, with the exception of like your core guys? Why, so that, the focus has been about these guys who are going to be your future, right? For the Sharks, the 2020 draft class where, you talk about Thomas Bordeleau and Brandon Coe and Daniel Gushin, who's this freakish Russian sniper. Getting excited about these guys. And then this year where they're actually going to be playing the AHL and focusing on how much fun, like, this AHL team is going to be. I know the Rockets have been a pretty solid team, good team for the last couple of years, while the Barracuda have been there, but like kind of enjoying and like kind of seeing, okay, like how did these guys all fit together? How did they work together, and trying to project how they're going to eventually make an impact on the Sharks. And for me, at least for the Sharks, and how are these guys going to fit with Cole Caulfield and your Suzuki's and your guys like that to try to, make that next Habs core. I think that's going to be the big, kind of the thing to do for you guys. And while not all of them are going to pan out, that's just, statistically, they're not all going to pan out. You can at least try to kind of find those guys who maybe have that something special that you can see, like, okay, yes, this is a translatable skill. And, like for us, our prize possession is William Eklund and his spinnies and, gaining 7 pounds of muscle this offseason. But like, you can see he has NHL caliber elite vision, and his skating is amazing, and the way his passes, how he can make everybody around him better. And you're like, okay, I can see him playing with Hurdle, who's going to be with the Sharks next years, or if Timo Meier, if they decide to re-sign him, if you have Eklund doing spinnies and Timo Meier, who's a big monster who can just drive to the net, you can see how that all works together. And trying to figure out how these guys will fit on a roster is kind of the fun part.
You ever find a friend for Eklund yet, or is that still an ongoing search?
The friend that we were looking for Eklund might have been Thomas Bordeleau the entire time. So that was the big, our big mission this year was to try to find an Eklund a friend. The Sharks moved down in the draft pick, and while I think they should have drafted Brad Lambert, Philip Bystead's having a pretty solid season in SHL to start things off. But the bromance between Eklund and Bordeleau is already there. The Sharks tweeted out on their social media accounts today a selfie of them at Media Day, and Bordeleau's creativity and Eklund's vision, like you can see those guys together. They're going to need somebody who can shoot the puck a little bit better than those two guys on that line, but there's something there.
So I just want to tell our listeners, so we've been getting some praise for our prospect content and the guests that we get. And chances are when we have a prospect guest on, JD was the one who facilitated the introduction or recommended the person because Locked On Sharks was obviously like one of the earlier adopters of the prospect previews, the prospect in-depth reviews and things like that, which I really love. So I have a question that's kind of turning the attention a little bit. I know that's not the case this year because there have been some changes, but in Montreal, one of the things that we're holding on to as we head into a season that we know isn't supposed to be great is there's two things that we're watching. One, who's going to get traded off the roster and what return will they get, which I know was a big thing for the Sharks, and they were able to get rid of a couple of key contracts. And two, for Montreal, one of the things that we're excited about is the coaching staff and how they're going to work with this young group of players, whether they make it this season or not. We're excited to see what Marty's got. We're excited to see what Robidaw's got, all of that kind of stuff. So what were the non like literal player related bits of excitement that you guys held on to as you were heading into these seasons, like the last couple of seasons that you knew weren't going to be great?
Yeah, it was a little tougher in that department because, I mean, Doug Wilson, who he's very maligned in the fan base, especially where handing out these big contracts. And, it's tough with Doug Wilson because you've had 15 years of sustained success with Doug Wilson of being playoff contenders. And if a couple things happen differently, I think if, Vlasic doesn't get the concussion, they're not reverse swept and they have a chance of winning the cup back in 2014. If Erik Karlsson doesn't blow out his groin, they probably beat the Blues, and then maybe they beat the Bruins in 2019. Like, a lot of these little things that happen, and that's just part of playing hockey, right? This guy stuff happening, but I think you look at the Sharks cap friendly page where it's like it's a hot mess, and you've spent all this money on Brent and Vlasic and Karlsson, and Vlasic turned into a pumpkin of himself, and you're paying, you had to buy out Martin Jones and all this fun stuff. So it's been tough for Sharks fans to try to find even that like off the ice stuff because of just how a mess, the system has been in, and you haven't had good prospects. And the only really good prospect that you had was Ryan Merkley, and he is nowhere near what you expected when you drafted him in the first round. So it's tough. And then, Pete DeBoer didn't really inspire a lot of confidence. And then having Bob Bugner, who is basically a Pete DeBoer disciple, didn't really inspire a lot of confidence in your team. I don't know what to tell you there. And then, we have David Quinn, who's at least he's coached a lot of college kids. So you're hoping that maybe that will translate. But hearing the stories of his time with the Rangers and how he kind of was really tough on some of these young guys and kept them on a short leash and didn't let them go through that growing process doesn't inspire a lot of confidence when you have a group of young guys who are going to be starting to infiltrate the Sharks organization here soon. So, yeah, at least you have Martin St. Louis.
We do have one more segment to touch on here coming up. We're going to talk about whatever else we can do to seed and cope with this upcoming season. It might be good. It might be bad. It might be somewhere in between. It's likely going to be bad. We're going to find out more coming up next. We are back. It is the Locked On Canadiens, Locked On Sharks therapy coping crossover. I don't want to call it like a preview because we're not really previewing anything except how both our teams are bad, and we're just going to commiserate this entire year. We've talked about finding joy in prospects and younger players and such. What else can Habs fans kind of do to maybe not burn out and just lose their mind on watching the team this year? Because it's an 82-game season. It's several months. It's a lot of hockey. It's going to be likely a lot of bad hockey at some point. How can Habs fans kind of find some solace and peace in this season?
Yeah, I think for Canadiens fans and Sharks fans and just kind of fans of bad teams is you want to see that growth of your young players and guys are going to be part of your next core. And, maybe those personal milestones maybe Cole Caulfield really takes that, I think for you guys, that big step forward and becomes that 35, 40 goal scorer that you, and most people, myself included, think that he could be. Which of these young kind of defenders are really going to kind of step in and take that next step, and trying to find these guys who are going to be taking those next steps. And while we both agree the Canadiens are not going to be that great, I think they could be like a 8, 9, 10-ish team when it comes to the draft this year, and not as bad as maybe you guys think, just because I think you can see a lot of these guys kind of making progress and being better than what we saw before last year, especially with a full season of real coaching and a real infrastructure, and letting, we saw with Martin St. Louis how much he just unlocked Cole Caulfield. And, what if the Canadiens are kind of like the Sabres last year, where they're kind of that feel good story, and by the end of the season, they're playing pretty decent hockey for a young team.
I think that's something that, we're kind of coming to terms with, because the debate in Montreal isn't, are they good or not? It's how bad are they going to be? And some people think they're going to be abjectly terrible and, they're going to challenge for a top 3 pick, which would be great in terms of like the draft. But I don't think that that's on the cards this year because for all the reasons you explained, right? There's going to be some players that are coming into their own. There's going to be some players who are currently expected to go in the AHL, they might shine and make the NHL team and, like kind of accelerate the process. For me, I think if the Canadiens are able to get a top 7 pick, I'm okay because I know we're probably not going to get that elite top 3 potentially. And again, things could happen. Florida's pick is.
You just had one. Say something for the rest of us.
Right?
Yeah, but what about a second one? Like,
right?
Why
well,
not?
Why not two? Why not both?
We got to get silly for Fantilli. Like, come on. Like, we're not going to be bad enough to get Connor Bedard unless everything goes the Habs' way this year because Chicago. Quite frankly,
Chicago and Arizona have put their stamps on the Bedard, but if you reach for the Bedards, you'll fall among the Fantillis. That's that's
Michkov. Well, potentially the Michkovs. There's that whole we don't know what's happening with Russian import. But anyways, like you said though, it's like they're going to be like I think better than some people expect just because the entire team isn't going to just be beat to hell this year. Like. Yeah, Jake Allen's not going to blow out his hamstring playing a meaningless game against the Leafs where he's doing his best. Samuel Montembeault is not going to play with one arm the entire season. Like, they're not going to be coached by Dominique Ducharme for 4 months. Like, that's all a positive thing here. And I almost wonder, like, are they going to be the team that surprises people the most? Just because, the roster's not great, but Martin St. Louis, before they traded away like half of his starting lineup at the trade deadline, was getting some pretty good results out of the team there. And I'm interested to see just what they do and like the young guys here. Like if Slavkovsky sticks in the NHL, that's just something I'm going to watch every night. I will watch and analyze every shift that giant child puts out on the ice there because why would I want to watch Mike Hoffman every night when I can watch Juraj Slavkovsky instead? So I'm really hoping to be pleasantly surprised, I think, more than anything this year is that like the expectations of the floor, if they finish, bottom 3, okay, cool. They get another pick and they get to ship out more weight and continue their rebuild. And if they're better than that, they still have Florida's unprotected first-round pick and potentially Calgary's, if I remember reading the trade bits correctly on that Sean Monahan deal, which I'm not going to look up right now, so I'm going to wing it on this podcast.
I'm supposed to record a video of reading the terms, like just by myself. I can't remember what it was, but one of the listeners asked for it in the comments, was like, and it was either for like to celebrate a milestone amount of subscribers or whatever. And it was like, can Laura just read the entire conditions? And I think I was supposed to either drink something gross or just read them. I can't remember. Anyway, I will be reading at some point.
Read that whole thing. Yeah, I mean,
I don't know which one of that's worse. Like, they're both terrible. We should record it like full, like King George, get the powdered wig and go and sit on something and pull out like the giant comedy scroll and just read and just make an entire trade thing. However,
I have vibes here just thinking of that wig right now.
I'll do it then.
You should have Jess from Locked On Flames on as you read the whole thing, and then there you go.
I mean, like going back one of those medieval trumpets, then
going back to the Habs, like roster stuff. It's like Kirby Dach, like he's 21, and it feels like we're waiting for that like Kirby Dach season. Like, what if this is the season? Like getting away from that terrible Chicago franchise and like getting to play with a bunch of these young guys here, and kind of maybe it kind of reignites his. He was a top 3 pick for a reason. It's not like he's bad at hockey or forgot how to play hockey. Like there's a lot of fun young pieces. And that's why I think I know the Sharks are gonna be worse than the Habs this year. I just like,
oh my God, we need to like mark this and like make a bet.
Yeah. Or Scott and I will both eat something terrible on.
Why?
Fine. No, it has to be Scott or JD. Okay. Yeah. I think that the Habs will be worse than the Sharks. Scott, what about you?
I think the Sharks will be potentially better than the Habs. It all depends on like. I will say this: they're gonna tie in points, and no one's gonna be happy about this. Like
we're both just eating sad stuff.
We're just eating something terrible at the same time. We'll do a live stream when that happens. So,
yes. But like here's my case. Here's my case, right? while the Sharks might have like more NHL caliber players on their roster, and they, Mike Greer made a point this year to like go get a bunch of guys, but it's like Nico Sturm and Luke Kunin and like Matt Benning. Like these guys don't really inspire a
It
lot of
sounds like a
confidence.
Minnesota Wild roster right there.
A bunch of dudes who aren't real. Like,
yeah. But, it's just like a bunch of guys who are kind of just placeholders until your prospects are ready to go. But none of these guys, like you can point to and be like, okay, I can see this guy making a jump, like a realistic jump. Like I can see this guy maybe going from like a 7-8 goal scorer to a 15-20 goal scorer if things go right. You've got Tomas Hertl. You know exactly what you get at Hertl. You have Timo Meier. Timo Meier in a contract year. Okay, we're anywhere from 70 to 90 points for Timo Meier. Logan Couture, probably 50 to 60. Erik Karlsson, when he's healthy. What do you know?
I just looked at the Sharks cap friendly page. I did not realize Logan Couture was signed through the heat death of the universe.
Yep.
Oh man. There's a bunch of guys that I did not know were here. Like
which of the looking at which of those guys you're like, oh yeah, this guy can totally make a jump and kind of be, going from here to here type of player. And like you look at the Canadiens, you can see that, right? Nick Suzuki really coming into his own. Cole Caulfield, Kirby Dach, if he has, he makes that jump now
and good development.
Some consistency, like you can see that with these guys. That's why I think I think the Sharks floor is like a little bit higher. I think they're like this type of like a very low ceiling, high floor team. And while the Canadiens, everything can go wrong for them, but a lot of stuff could go right. And that's why I think they just have more variance for them. And, and it's like James Reimer, are we going to see the same James Reimer we saw last year from who was standing on his head and stealing games for the Sharks? No, we're not going to. Like, he's 34, 35. We're not like, that's just not physically possible. And while I think Capo Kakkonen has a chance to kind of come into his own, I see a lot of question marks for the Sharks, and I don't see a lot of answers to those question marks.
Can we do a rapid fire, Scott?
Sure.
Unless you had something.
I was gonna say we got a little bit of time here just to wrap up the show. So, Laura, what do you got for rapid fire?
Okay, we're each going to name a prospect that we're excited about, but JD, you can't say Eklund, and Scott, you cannot say Owen Beck. No Owen Beck.
I'm quitting this podcast.
Who in the system are you most excited about?
Can I say Bordelot?
You can say
you can say
Bordelot.
whoever you want. You just said you can't say
Eklund.
Eklund. So
yeah, Bordelot, the Michigan prospect, ton of swag, not as much size as Slavkovsky, but you can see the creativity. He made Rudolph Balcers and Noah Gregor fun last year, and if you can do that, that you're pretty high on my list there. So,
Scott.
Well, I can't say Owen Beck, and Yuri Slavkovsky feels like cheating. So I'm going to actually say Philip Mayshar because his rights are with Kitchener, but apparently he doesn't want to go to the OHL since he's used to playing in a men's league. So he may go to Sweden. I believe is what Patrick Bexell said. He's someone I'm really excited about just because he's got wizard hands, and I love that. Like when he puts it all together, he's going to be just a nightmarish player to play against. And he and Slavkovsky just have like that connection you only get when you've been playing hockey together since you were kids. So I am really hoping he lights it up wherever he's playing this year.
So I can't say Lane Hudson because he's my own Beck. So I'll just go with Sean Farrell. That's going to be, obviously it's not going to be this year, likely, but I'm excited about him. And one more thing, Scott, I kind of know this answer, and this one has no restrictions, but what contract do each of you want off your team as soon as possible?
Ooh. I mean, you traded the Brent Burns one, which is probably good for the Sharks already. Like, I look at this and I go like, I mean, I want to say Mike Hoffman, but that really feels like cheating. Like, but I think between Hoffman or Yoel Armia, it's one of those two. Like Hoffman at least can be a power play goal scorer and everything. Armia, don't know because I don't want a $3.4 million bottom six winger. Anybody? Edmonton, please.
It's Vlasic. $7 million.
No.
Don't even
No.
think about our listeners will not.
Loves,
No.
from the great Quebec area. Vlasic, who's been kind of a buyout candidate the past couple years. He's no longer the guy he was. Is basically a third pair defenseman. Has even been healthy scratch last season, and $7 million for that type of production. I know the easy answer is Erik Karlsson, but Erik Karlsson can still have those nights and those flashes where you're like, oh yeah, he's still one of the best defenders in the world. And when he's on his game, you can see that. And he still makes ridiculous, passes that are across the entire ice that sets guys up. And you can see those nights and stuff. They're not as frequent as they used to be, but you still see those flashes. And I just love Erik Karlsson too much. So yeah, it's Vlasic. 4 years at $7 million. You could do a lot of stuff with $7 million.
That is going to wrap up our coping preview with JD of Locked On Sharks. JD, do you want to let our folks know where they can find you and find all the Locked On Sharks stuff across social media?
Yes, you can find Locked On Sharks, of course, on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Our Twitter is pretty funny, not as funny as it used to be now that we're not allowed to swear anymore on Twitter, but we still have some tricks up our sleeve for this season. So, and then of course you can listen to the podcast wherever you get podcasts, and of course subscribe on YouTube. You can find me on the old Twitter at myfryhole, where I'm still allowed to swear, and I do it regularly.
And that's where you post your Etsy stuff. The stickers
and my Etsy stuff, yes. So
some of our listeners we bought some of our listeners stickers for like being milestone followers and winning contests. So some of you are familiar with the stickers. And what I didn't know was I thought JD would send us a personal note. He sends everybody a personal note with these stickers.
I got a personal note.
I know, but see, I thought it was just you and me because we were friends.
I'm very good at listening, so that's my sign to wrap up today's show. You can follow Laura at The Active Stick. You can follow myself at Scott Mellon. You can follow us on Twitter at LO_Canadians. Subscribe wherever you get your podcast, and subscribe on YouTube so you can see our smiling faces as we cope our way through this Montreal Canadiens season. JD, thank you so much, everyone. We will see you next time.